1.
George and Lisa are overseas students studying in Britain. They are returning home for the summer holidays.
First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 3.
That'll be $23. Right, there's your change. Have a nice trip. Oh, I'll just get your bags out of the boot.
Thank you very much. Now, George, let's find the check-in desk.
Yes, but with all the changes they have made here at the airport, I'm not sure where the check-in desk is.
I know, it's strange, isn't it? Why don't we ask for help?
Good idea. What about that man sitting down over there?
Which one? The one with the hat on and in the trolley?
No, the one with the uniform behind the table. I'll ask him. Excuse me, could you tell me where the check-in desk for France Air is, please? Oh, let me think. The best way to get there would be to turn left at the end there, where the cafe is, and then go straight ahead until you're opposite the departure gate's entrance. Oh, no. Sorry. It might be quicker to turn right as soon as you get past the cafe, and keep going along the corridor until you come to the sliding doors at the end. On the left. Yes, that's it. All the check-in counters are in a hall there. I'm pretty sure France Air is directly to your left as you walk in the hall.
Thanks a lot. So, it's the left past the cafe and then right opposite...
The bookshop. You can't miss it. Come on then, Lisa. We don't want to be late, and I want some time to get a cup of coffee and look around the bookshop.
Okay, George, but I want to go to the restroom first. I'll meet you at the check-in desk.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 4 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 4 to 10.
Good morning. Can I help you?
Yes, I would like to check in for flight FA492.
Very good. Can I have your ticket and passport, please?
Oh, yes, here you are.
Okay, thanks. If you could just put your suitcase on the scales.
Oh, I have this extra box that I want to take as well.
Okay, well, that's extra luggage, so I'll have to get you to fill out an excess baggage declaration certificate. It'll cost extra, I'm afraid. Let me see. $40 exactly, if the total value of your contents is under $400.
Oh, well, what's the form for?
It's just a form you have to fill out so that if there are any problems, we'll know where you are and how to contact you. So, if you can give me a few details, I'll key in the information. Okay then, your passport says your name is Lavier. Is that right?
Yes, George Lavier.
George, Lavillliers. Good. Now, nationality. French? No, wait a minute. It's a Swiss passport.
Well, yes, I live in France, but I was born in Switzerland.
Swiss. Very good. Flight number FA492. Destination is...
Paris.
Are you connecting with any other flight in Paris, or will you be staying there?
I'm spending my vacation in Paris. Well, Sèvres, just outside Paris.
Okay. So what's the phone number there?
Let me think. The country code for France is 33, and the number is 198614537.
Right, so that's 331-9861-4537.
Yes, that's it.
And can you tell me briefly what you have in the box?
Well, there are some books, just university textbooks from last semester, some clothes, and, my computer disks.
Okay, thank you. And what would be the approximate value of the contents?
Quite a bit, actually. About $150.
That's all. There's your receipt for the box, your passport and ticket, and here is your boarding pass. Gate 7. You can board the plane in about 35 minutes. Have a nice flight.
That is the end of part 1.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 2.
Part 2.
You will hear 2 first-year engineering students discussing their project on devices which have been specially designed for use in developing countries.
First, look at questions 11 to 14. Listen carefully and decide which 4 planned developments are mentioned.
Hi, Aileen. Thanks for coming.
No problem. We've got our presentation coming up on Tuesday, so we need to get everything prepared now.
Yeah, so we're agreed that we're going to concentrate on these 2 devices which have particularly helped people in developing countries.
Yes, and we'll present the information in the form of a table, so it'll be really clear for non-specialists. We'll have 3 columns, using the headings we discussed in the last seminar.
OK, I've got those here. I'll make notes. So let's start with the clockwork radio and how it works. We'll obviously say how it's powered, i.e. that it's wound up.
Yeah, and we'll also need to explain how the energy is stored.
OK, in a spring.
Fine, keep it simple. But we also need to say that the thing which makes the mechanism so special is the inclusion of a gearbox, which makes it possible to release energy extremely slowly. And that means that it can operate for a long time with minimal effort.
OK. Now, the next section is what are its benefits? I suppose we just need to emphasise that it costs a lot less than radios which use batteries. And if we want to, we can explain that these can cost as much as a week's wages in some parts of the world.
Absolutely. And related to that, of course, is the fact that people don't have to depend on buying anything in a store, which in remote rural areas is really important.
And then in the developments column, I think the most important thing we need to say is that the combination of the wind-up mechanism with a solar cell means that during the day it runs on the sun's energy, and you only have to wind it up when it's dark, which makes it a much more attractive option.
And that's probably that for the radio.
Yep.
Before the broadcast continues, look at questions 15 to 20. You will now listen to the second part of the talk.
So we'll then move on to the solar box cooker.
And again, let's keep the description of the mechanism very simple. We need to say that it uses sunlight rather than conventional fuels to cook food.
But we also need to explain two elements of why it's so efficient.
Yeah. The fact that sun's rays enter through a plastic cover.
Better call it a lid. I thought it was made of glass.
Not according to my research.
Okay.
And then we just say that light is transformed into heat and...
Because it has a longer wavelength means that it gets trapped.
And so it cooks the food.
Good. Right. And then where do we begin on the advantages? There's so many.
I suppose we have to begin with the fact that you no longer need to cut down trees, which brings a whole raft of other benefits in its turn.
Sure. And related to that, I think we need to say that because dung is no longer needed as a fuel for cooking, it can be used as a fertiliser.
Which leads to better harvests.
And then there's the fact that there is absolutely no smoke. I was reading somewhere that there's a huge incidence of lung complaints, especially among women and children who have to breathe in smoke from conventional cookers.
So that's another plus point.
Yep. And then we need to say something about the way cookboxes have been improved. I think we can emphasise the fact that a reflector is often added at an angle to the lid to maximise the amount of light entering.
Yes, good point. And also, I read about the fact that the floor or base of the box is raised, which improves heat retention.
Oh, and I think we should mention the fact that many of the new boxes have a sloping or inclined lid, which increases the surface area to capture the sun's rays.
Yes, that's a good point to finish on, I think.
So, I'll write up that table on an OHT if you like, and we're all set for our presentation.
Yes, great. If there's anything else that you think we should discuss...
That is the end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 3.
Part 3.
You will hear a tutor and 2 students discussing the best ways to study.
First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 25. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 25.
Well, how are you both settling in?
Fine.
Yes, no problems. So far, anyway.
Good. Remember that as your personal tutor, I'm here to help you if you do have any difficulties. Now, as you know, lectures start on Monday, so I thought we'd look at a few ways of making the most of them, especially in terms of the notes you take. Let's begin by thinking about what you can do before you even go to the lecture. Any ideas?
Make sure you're up to date with all the background reading, so you know plenty about the subject already.
Yes, that's essential. The lecturer will assume you have that knowledge. Anything else, Carlos?
Well, check what the topic's going to be. Of the lecture, that is.
I'd go a bit further than that and consider what the content may be. Then you could ask yourself some questions that you want answering and listen out for the relevant information during the lecture.
Okay.
Now that brings us to the lecture itself and the actual business of writing notes. But there's a lot to deal with there, so we'll come back to that later. What I'd like to do for the moment is continue with the process of note-taking and move on to the next stage. Any suggestions for what that might be?
When the lecture is over, you mean?
Yes, once you're able to sit down somewhere quiet with your notes.
Read them?
More than that, You need to make sure they'll still make sense to you weeks, months later.
Edit them?
Yes, that's what's needed. It's well worth spending a few minutes on it. Any missing words, anything difficult to read, things you didn't have time to jot down, now is the time to do so, while everything's still fresh in your mind.
Right. And after that, when's the best time to revise them?
When do you think, Carlos?
I'd say just before the next lecture, in the same subject.
Precisely. That's a vital time to look at them again, for obvious reasons. But it's definitely not the only time. When should you revise them again?
A month later, maybe?
Sooner, and much more often than that. I'd recommend you look at them again once a week. That's why it's so important they're complete and easy to follow.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 26 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 26 to 30.
Right. Let's go back to note-taking and begin with the basics before the lecture has even started. What should you do when you walk into the room?
Get a good seat, at the front if you can, where you can hear clearly and avoid distractions.
Yes, though obviously others will have had the same idea, so it's as well to get there a bit early. So, when the lecture's underway and you're busy jotting things down, what should you try to ensure?
That you're getting all the main points.
And what if you don't catch something you know must be important?
I'd leave a space. Then I could check it later, perhaps by asking a question at the end and fill it in afterwards.
That's an excellent way to deal with it, yes. And there's something else I'd like to mention here. Talking about going through notes afterwards, it's absolutely vital that what you write is legible for one very good reason. It saves time. You'll waste many hours during the course if your revision is held up because you can't read what you've written. Okay, what else can we do to make listening and note-taking more efficient?
Well, I always listen out for signpost words.
Sorry, what are they?
They're the ones lecturers use to say where they're going. A bit like a signpost at a road junction, I suppose. Things like, the first reason is, however, to sum up, and so on.
Yes, they can tell you when something important is coming, and help you organize your notes, too. Is there anything else you can add, Carlos?
There's something I think's very useful, but it's later, after the lecture is finished.
That's fine. Go on.
Well, what I do is go through what I've written down, summing up the main points in a few words in the margin, on the left-hand side of the page. I try to use words that'll jog my memory, so that I can remember what everything's about when I look at them again.
Yes, that can work very well. What some people do to review their notes is cover up their full notes from the lecture, maybe with a piece of paper or a card, and concentrate just on what they've put in the margin, trying to recall the details. Then they move the cover down a little and check whether they were right.
Or you could put your main points on another piece of paper and clip them together. Instead of covering and uncovering, you just hold a page in each hand.
Sure. It's down to personal preference, really. Everyone has their own learning style.
That is the end of part 3.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to Part 4.
Part 4.
You are going to hear a talk given by Jim Allen. He is going to share some of his findings of his research. Now you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
Good morning. Today we'll be hearing from Jim Allen, who will be sharing some of the findings of his research project from last term. Jim.
Thanks. Well, to start with, a little bit of background about the project. As you can see, our title is something that is relevant to everybody in this part of the world: water safety. These days, there's a lot more to water safety because of the increasing number and range of boats and other things people use on public waterways. I'd become interested through reports on radio about the number of incidents involving small powerboats and individual watercraft such as jet skis. It seemed to me that because these craft were essentially recreational and didn't require licenses to use, there was very little opportunity to influence the users towards being safety conscious. So, I decided to make this the focus of the project. For the research, we mainly relied upon talking to people, asking them questions in preference to using a written questionnaire. We interviewed a wide range of people at a number of popular swimming locations over 2 consecutive weekends and asked them what they'd observed or experienced themselves. The respondents were both male and female, but the men were just slightly in the majority. We were pleased with their willingness to talk about the subject, and all told, interviewed 145 people over the 2 weekends. So, what were the findings? As you can see, 86% of people reported having had some type of problem. A surprisingly large percentage, 27%, commented that they had found it necessary to shout at an offending powerboat, but the main type of problem was the deafening sound that some of the boats made. On occasions, this led to swimmers deciding to move to another location. So what strategies did people adopt to ensure their own comfort and safety? Let's have a look at the figures. First, it was noticeable that there were often distinctly different answers between men and women. It was mainly the women, for example, who said they should try to choose places where boats couldn't go, whereas it was usually the men who said you shouldn't have to move if you were there first, so you should shout at them if necessary. Both men and, it was women who said you should call the authorities if the situation gets too dangerous or the powerboat drivers are acting irresponsibly. Then, I had thought it would be mainly women, but both sexes made the point that above all, it's important to get children away from any possible danger. Men were very aware that jet skis could be unpredictable in inexperienced hands. They also made the point that it's much safer to have your car nearby and clearly visible to any watercraft if you're swimming in a relatively remote spot. Finally, wearing visible clothing, men didn't think it was quite as important as women, but both gave it a high safety rating. When we asked them what they thought the government should do to help solve the problem,
That is the end of Part 4.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.